Right, I'm going to start this now, guys.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much indeed for joining the weekly Greater Manchester COVID briefing. Joined today by Sir Richard Lees, Deputy Mayor and Leader of Manchester City Council, who leads on health for Greater Manchester. And I'm going to hand straight over to Sir Richard to take you through this week's slides. So, Richard.
Thanks very much, Andy. Good afternoon, everybody. Before I start on the slides, is that I have an occasional temporary role every time we do a consultation around buses, and we've got a major consultation that started today on bus reform. This follows a review that took place to look again at proposals for bus reform in the light of COVID-19, in light of the pandemic. Having looked at that again, we're now going out to consult, because I think that's only right that we do that with the new information that we've got. I think the only comment I make though is that the conclusion that review has come to is that the pandemic has strengthened the case for bus reform and clearly identifies franchising as the route that will provide both the best service and the best value for money. We're testing that over the next few weeks through public consultation with the aim of coming to a decision. And clearly this is a decision for Andy as Mayor later in the spring. Turning to the slides, you'll see that every district has now improved further. That the trend is continuing. We've got a number of districts that are below the national average. Over half now under that, including Greater Manchester as a whole, under the 200 mark. And since these figures were compiled, these are for the week ending 27th of November. If you look at the daily figures, we've seen continued improvement there. So if we're not just talking about the figures, the trend is very much in the right direction. Can we look at the next one? This is the age profiles. And there is one blip in there, which is Rochdale, but you can always get a blip in a given week. But what you'll see is across all of the age groups now is that the number of cases has been coming down. And this is really important for the over 65 cases, because it's over 65s who are most likely to be hospitalised. So that's very, very positive. And again, you can see as you go from dark to light that this is not just 1 or 2 weeks. This is trend now over a number of weeks. Next one. Regional comparisons. If you compare Greater Manchester with every other region in the UK, our change in 7-day incidence rate, this is over a 2-week period of time. A little bit later, I'm going to do a comparison with the last week of that, but you will see for the 2-week rate that we basically decreased at a rate equal to, in the case of Yorkshire and Humberside, or faster than any other region in England, which is I think pretty good progress, really. Again, if we move on, weekly Pillar 2 testing per 100,000 population. This is going to get more complex, of course, now as we're starting to use lateral flow tests. And I was told by my Director of Public Health this morning that the lateral flow tests that have been carried out on students to allow them to safely return home over Christmas. So far, we've not had a single positive test there, but none of that's reflected in these figures. This is the Pillar 2 testing, but again, we do see a very significant increase in the number of positive tests, again, across the board there. Move on. Care homes is a slight cause for concern. We've seen that the rate has gone up slightly over the last week, although that reflects a smaller number of homes. So I think there's probably a couple of outbreaks have distorted those figures. And going back to the Rochdale over 65s, I think that's one of the reasons that their over 65 figure has gone up a little bit. The number of care homes affected has gone down, and as you can see, we're still significantly better than we were 3 weeks ago, and very much significantly better than we were in the dark days of April and May, when it was pretty much twice that sort of rate. Again, if we can move on. This is hospitals. Clearly one of the key tests is pressure on intensive care. You see that for weekly admissions to hospitals for COVID-19, for the figure up to the 30th of November, it's 66. If we add a day to that, it's down to 60. So that rate is coming down. What we've not got in this table is the rate of admissions. Clearly people who move from general wards into intensive care largely. And for COVID, that's gone down from 14 a week ago, COVID patients going into intensive care, to 8 over the past 7 days. So actually a very significant reduction in cases going into intensive care. And that's partially reflected now by the number of intensive care beds. Sorry, go back, stay where you are, yeah, stay where you are, that are occupied with patients there, 116. You can see the trend there going down now over a 2-week period of time. ICU beds will lag behind other data because this week's positive tests are the people who are in hospital in 2 weeks and the people in ICU in 4 weeks. And what you can see in all of this is that the pressure is coming down. And the total number of COVID patients is coming down as well, probably slightly more slowly, but that's because of something that I have referred to earlier. And it's, in some respects, that number is coming down slightly more slowly is quite good news, because this is to do with survival rates, and the mortality rate in Greater Manchester, again, is still significantly better than the national average, but that survival does lead to longer stays. In terms of intensive care, the total number of intensive care beds occupied is now around about 213. It means the number of intensive care beds is round about what normal. There are still some surge beds, but it is a normal number of beds for this time of the year. And what we're also seeing is that for things other than COVID, an increase in people being treated, an increase in cases, which are particularly things like cancer, which I think is particularly good news. We're also probably going to see this week the first examples of hospitals that have effectively turned or created extra ICU capacity for COVID, extra wards for COVID, those wards going back to normal purposes as well. So we're now in that part of the journey. And when I spoke to Greater Manchester's lead for intensive care earlier today, I think they're also now talking about being able to ensure that health staff get some leave over the next few weeks. A lot of them have not had leave for a very long period of time, and I think really important that they are able to get some rest and relaxation after what they've been through over the last few months. So all of this, I think, looking very positive at the moment. If you want to come to the next slide. And this is a slide that about the Greater Manchester case rate when decisions were made on tiering. And you see that the tier 1 range, tier 2 range, the tier 3 range. If you look at the tier 3 range, that for local authorities there, the normal range was 236 cases per 100,000 through to 431. The Greater Manchester rate is slapdash in the middle of that. So I think the suggestion that Greater Manchester was sort of picked on or somehow unfairly treated isn't backed up by those figures. Personally, I still think it was the wrong decision, but if you look at those figures, you can see why the decision was made. It is certainly explainable. The other comparison that certainly Greater Manchester is often keen to make is with Liverpool. Liverpool's figures, certainly when the decisions were made, was significantly better than ours. Certainly more than a good 100 points better than ours. And so again, the figures explain why those decisions were made. But I'm going to show you. I think I've got one more after this, or is that? Yeah, we have got one more. This is the comparison with London, but it's Greater Manchester now with London at the time that the tiering decision was made. You can see that even our current rate now is slightly higher than London at the time of tiering, the average rate, although our positivity rate is significantly better, and the rate at which cases are falling is also significantly better. And if you want to compare that slide with the previous slide, that the overall Greater Manchester numbers would now most definitely put us in Tier 2. So very hopeful now that when we do get decisions being made in the next, well, government initially said a 2-weekly review of the tiers, that when the first review is done, certainly if you look at the overall figures for Greater Manchester, and if you look at the trend, if you look at the trajectory, this would suggest that we most definitely ought to be in Tier 2 by the time we get to that review. In fact, we're probably in that position now. Certainly by the time we get to the review, we ought to be very much in the position of being in Tier 2. I think probably, Andy, that's me done for today on the health. Yep.
Great, thanks very much indeed, Richard. Some really encouraging news there. And just to pick up where you left off, obviously going into Tier 3 today for the City region is hard, certainly for our hospitality businesses. And while we were pleased that the government put something extra on the table, particularly for our pubs yesterday, I think it's generally thought it's not enough to save pubs that are now at serious risk of closure. So I note that the opposition parties obviously abstained yesterday, but I would encourage them to consider bringing a fresh vote on the financial support for Tier 3, because the fact that the government didn't get a majority of MPs in the House backing their proposals suggests that there's a lot of disquiet about that. And whereas Greater Manchester might have been a lone voice a few weeks ago, certainly we're not now. I think there's a lot of concern about the effect of Tier 3 on the economy, particularly through this Christmas period, which is so critical for our hospitality businesses. We do now need to start thinking seriously about recovery, and let's not let businesses fall on this last lap. We do need to do more to help them, and certainly I'll be encouraging the Labour Party and the other opposition parties to consider a fresh vote on financial support for Tier 3, because I think the consensus in Parliament is that isn't right at the moment, and damage will certainly be done. Later today I'll have an event with Steve Rotherham, Sadiq Khan, Jamie Driscoll, Dan Jarvis, Andy Street, with the excluded group and the forgotten group, because there's still the issue of people who've been excluded from public support, and they too need help before we go into the end of the year. And we'll be making that case again tonight. The government hasn't done enough to listen, and it needs to listen, and we'll be making that case. Just another bit of news on the economic front first before I turn to the vaccine. Of course, we really feel for people in Greater Manchester affected by the collapse of Arcadia and Debenhams. On Debenhams, there are 7 branches across the city region, quite a lot, so a huge number of people affected there, and obviously many more the other chains affected by this situation. We of course have got the growth company in Greater Manchester working with Manchester City Council and all of our partners in terms of what we can do, including the DWP as well. In the first instance, I would want to use this briefing today to refer people to a service called Employ GM. So this is open to individuals who've been affected by the news, and it's a way of connecting people to companies that are currently recruiting. So as a first port of call, we would suggest that people use the Employ GM service set up by our growth company. But more broadly, we are considering establishing a task force of the kind that we've used before, most notably perhaps with Thomas Cook. So that isn't confirmed yet, but we are looking at whatever else we can do to support people affected by the administration, and we will be able to say more in due course. But the first port of call today is Employ GM. Lastly, if I may, I'll just touch on the vaccine, and of course it's extremely encouraging news that the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine has been approved by the MHRA. We had an update yesterday with regard to arrangements in Greater Manchester for starting to deliver the vaccine. I think it's important to sort of manage expectations at this stage. As people may have heard in the news, the vaccine is complicated from a handling and storage point of view, and difficult to move around, certainly over long periods. So in the first instance, it would be very much NHS staff who will be the focus of the rollout of the vaccine from a small number of sites. Of course, we will learn more as we begin the process of delivery, and we have plans for a major vaccination centre, which would then be able to broaden out the delivery of the vaccine. But it's obviously very good news today. Plans are well in hand here for the delivery of it, but I think everyone needs to remember that there is still a long way to go. And I just want to say a further thing around the safety of the vaccine and indeed the process that the MHRA will have used. I think I'm one of very few people in the country who has had direct experience of the development of a vaccine during a pandemic and the processes that are undertaken to assess the safety and the efficiency of that vaccine. Back in 2009, we put a lot of effort working with the regulator and other regulators around the world to speed up the delivery of the swine flu vaccine. And while there are things that can be done to quicken the process, I can absolutely give an assurance that nothing is ever done to cut corners in any way. And I think it's really important for me to say that today as a former health secretary. I can remember once or twice asking the MHRA in that process about where we were up to, and I was told politely but very firmly that it would take as long as it took, although obviously where delay could be reduced, they were doing that, and they do it independently, they do it thoroughly, and people should have absolute confidence in the MHRA, who in my view are one of the world's leading medicines and vaccines regulators, and actually the rest of the world does look to them actually for a lead. So I don't think there should be any concern today that the process that they will have conducted will have been anything other than completely sound. I have full trust in the judgment that they've reached, and I would encourage everybody else not to believe the scare stories, to trust in the regulator, and of course to be ready to receive the vaccine as soon as it's made available. So I'll leave it there, Ross. I'm going to hand back to you to take us through the questions today.
Thanks, Andy. First question is from Jen Williams at the MEN. Question for Andy: if you'd been in the House of Commons last night voting on the tiering system, how would you have voted and why? And a question for you and Sir Richard: when the tiers come to be reviewed in a fortnight, if the government looks to put some boroughs in tier 2 and others in tier 3, would you be opposed to that in principle? Do you think GM needs to be under the same rules across the piece? So Andy, if you want to take the first piece first.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jen. So I think the problem with the vote last night was the structure of it, and I think it's a tactic that's often used in Westminster by governments. That is to make it an all or nothing vote, so not an amendable piece of legislation. And obviously, the day before the regulations were due to take effect, and I think that leaves very little room for manoeuvre for opposition parties. And I think it's noticeable that the three main opposition parties all did the same thing. What I would say, Jen, is I certainly would have been making the argument behind the scenes for the opposition to use maximum leverage over the government, and I think that is happening because obviously they didn't give their support. Strong reservations were expressed about the lack of adequate financial support, and I would now today be making the argument for a fresh vote to be brought as soon as possible on the finances specifically, so separating the financial package from the restrictions themselves. Of course, it was all bundled up together yesterday, and what we need is a vote on the support or lack of. As I say, the money offered to pubs, I don't think in any way goes far enough. I think there are hundreds of pubs at risk across Greater Manchester, many of which are critical facilities within their communities. But also, I've made the point about the additional discretionary grant given to councils. It's the case that our 10 councils today are receiving no more money under that grant than places going into tier 2 or even into tier 1. That can't be fair, because that funding is the funding that can support the supply chain behind those pubs, restaurants and other venues, so cleaning, catering, security companies. So that is the argument that I would be making, Jen, that we need a fresh vote on the financial package. On the broader point about where we go in a couple of weeks' time, my preference would be that Greater Manchester moves as one, because we look back to the summer and some of the confusion that emerged when individual boroughs were taken out. That said, though, I don't think we want to be in a position where we turn our face completely against looking at Greater Manchester in clusters if there is a clear difference between, let's say, the south of the city region and the north. And I think those decisions would be taken at that time. If we can open the economy in parts of Greater Manchester, I think it would make sense to do that, rather than to take a very kind of rigid view about it. So my preference would be that we look to a GM solution overall. I think on the evidence presented by Sir Richard, we're beginning to see a number of our boroughs now below the England average, and GM itself getting close to the England average. A few further boroughs towards the north got slightly further to go, but they're coming down fast. So I think this picture is going to look different again in a couple of weeks' time, and I personally believe we will be in a position to make an argument that the whole of Greater Manchester be in tier 2. And I just want to stress that we will be presenting a case, working with the co-chairs of the LEP, working with other business partners in the city region, obviously working with our directors of public health, but we want to put a strong evidence-based case, positive case to the government to coincide with its decision-making process, that Greater Manchester should be in tier 2 at the first review.
Thanks. I'll bring Sir Richard in on the second point. You're on mute, Richard.
Apologies. Largely to agree with Andy, but we've got the table up there at the moment, and certainly I think having a pepper potting arrangement wouldn't make a lot of sense for Greater Manchester because of the way that people move around. It's figures that Oldham have used in the past, just how many of their residents move out of Oldham every day. So not in favour of pepper potting, but the other hand, if you look at the current Trafford figure, which is the lowest, and if you look at the Rochdale figure, and clearly they are geographically separated as well, I think you do have to ask the question, is it fair for Trafford businesses, Trafford people, for their businesses to be closed because of things that are happening in Rochdale? And I think it'd be very difficult to argue that that is fair. And again, if you look at those figures, you can see now that Manchester, Salford, Stockport, Tameside, Trafford, the southern half of the conurbation now are all under that 200 mark, and that does give an opportunity to take a big chunk of the conurbation and treat it differently. Although I'll add to all of that, on the current direction of travel, I would very much expect and would certainly be arguing for the entirety of Greater Manchester to be in Tier 2, because then we haven't got a problem. Well, we have got a problem, but not that problem.
Thanks, Richard. Question for Andy from Katie Hazeldine at That's Manchester. Andy, are you concerned that tier fatigue, combined with the positive news this morning about the vaccine, may lead to many in GM to become more relaxed about COVID as we reach the festive period?
Yes, Katie, it's a very, very good question, and I am concerned about that, because I feel that probably the most dangerous part of this is still to come, which is the December, January period. And that's why I was trying to say at the outset that the news about the vaccine is great, but we do need to manage expectations with regard to the effect it will have certainly in the short term. It will be confined very much to health service staff in the early stages, and that will certainly help hospitals function and will reduce staff sickness and absence over the crucial Christmas, New Year into January period. But I think we need to be realistic about the effect that the early delivery of the vaccine will have. It won't change the situation in the broader population, and I think people really need to remember that at all times. And I am on record as saying I think the arrangements for Christmas are too permissive. I think it's too long to say that 5 days is the mixing period, and I personally would have said it should be 2 rather than 3 households. So I think there is a real danger, and I think you know when we look at these numbers for Greater Manchester today, I would say to people, thank you, because it's obviously your sacrifice that's done it. But please, for goodness sake, let's not just throw it all away when we get to that to that period. Let's take it carefully, very carefully, and be mindful that the toughest part is yet to come. And I think January is the toughest part of this in both the NHS and in the wider economy. I think sadly we will see more redundancies coming. It's going to be a tough winter, and I think it would be a grave mistake for all of us to sort of be blindsided a little by the news about the vaccine and then forget what is very much a real and present danger with regard to the figures jumping up again. I think what we would say on the figures today, while they are encouraging, is there is still a reasonably large amount of the virus spreading in our communities, and there's a risk, when there is still quite a high number, of things turning around and there being a flare up and it moving back in the opposite direction. So there can't be any complacency here. People do need to take great care, particularly over that Christmas, New Year period. And in truth, it will only be when the AstraZeneca vaccine becomes available, the Oxford vaccine as it's called, when I think much greater inroads will be made into delivery within the priority groups and in the wider community. So, you know, that really must be borne in mind by people. I don't think the vaccine will have made much of an appreciable difference to the spread of the virus beyond healthcare staff by the turn of the year. And so, you know, the Christmas period is one that presents real risks, and people need to think about that.
Thanks, Andy. Richard, do you want to come in on that one? Oh, sorry, Richard, you're on mute.
For the third time. No, I'm fine. Fine with that, but just to possibly add that in terms of the first wave, that it will include a fair number of care staff as well. But when we get to the next question, the point to make about the Pfizer vaccine is that people have to go to the vaccine rather than the vaccine coming to them, and that will also restrict, particularly for care homes, the extent to which it will be usable there.
Thanks, Richard. Richard, do you want to take the first part of Tom Dambach's question? Richard, do you know which sites in GM have been selected to deliver the COVID-19 vaccine? And then I'll put the second point to Andy.
Yeah, well, I'm going to be really pedantic, Tom, on the first bit of that. I think, as Andy was just talking about, is we're not talking about the COVID-19 vaccine. We are talking about a number of vaccines, and we will almost certainly need a number of vaccines for different purposes, not just to do with portability, but also to do with age and other factors which might impact on which vaccines can be used and which are most appropriate. The whole of Greater Manchester now does have a vaccination plan, so yes, we do know how the vaccine is going to be delivered. Certainly for health and a large number of care workers, it will be delivered through the acute sector, through hospitals and other health professionals. For everybody else, most of the delivery will be through GPs, primary care networks, and there will be primary care networks across Greater Manchester that will be set up in order to deliver the vaccine. And outside that, there will be a small number of vaccine centres, including one, if you like, super vaccine centre, so that if all else fails, that there will be somewhere that people will be able to go to. All of those arrangements are in place. There is, of course, only one thing missing at the moment, but it looks like that the first batch of the vaccine will be on its way, hopefully fairly shortly.
Thanks, Richard. Specific question for Andy from Tom. You spoke last week about concerns over delivering the vaccine and surge testing. With the rollout next week, are you confident that Greater Manchester has the resource to be able to deliver it?
Well, certainly that has been a worry of people in the Greater Manchester system, Tom. The difficulties in concurrently delivering the vaccine, as well as introducing a form of wide-scale testing, the lateral flow testing. Certainly, if it was to get anything close to what people call the Liverpool model, I think the feeling here was that that wouldn't be deliverable. Obviously, the same level of military support wouldn't be offered. So that point had been made to the government. What I can say is, and I don't know whether Richard would want to add to this, Ross, a proposal has gone in, or is very much about to go in the next, certainly in the next day or so, if it's not gone in already, for targeted testing at scale in Greater Manchester. So not the asymptomatic testing on a much wider scale, but more focused on particular key groups. Indeed, it's already begun with regard to university students. So I think what's been developed is a plan where we can manage the resources and the delivery because of the way we've developed both vaccine rollout and this targeted testing plan at scale, working with key groups. So I think there is a high degree of confidence that we've got the balance right, Tom. The bid is going in, and obviously with that bid comes an ask for extra resources to deliver it. But it was signed off yesterday by the Greater Manchester COVID Emergency Committee. It's going into the government, and we will await to hear more. But it's challenging. Obviously, it will require us recruiting a lot of people, and people who perhaps have retired or volunteers. The work is underway to bring through the people that we will need on both fronts. But no, I think there's confidence now that both can be done.
Richard, do you want to come back in on that point?
Yeah, I think with respect to testing, it's the targeted testing that's really important. And certainly a lot of feedback we've got from the Liverpool pilot is that a very large number of the people who got tested were people who didn't really need testing. And if you look at the figures, the cases per 100,000 at the time the decision was made around tiers, the Liverpool figure, where of course they had what was described as mass testing, was exactly the same as Knowsley next door, which didn't have mass testing. So I think we need to be clear that if we're going to use large-scale testing, it needs to be used in a far smarter way, really, to make sure it has the required impact. As Andy said, we have put a bid in for Greater Manchester to be able to deliver the large-scale targeted testing. Part of that bid, of course, is around not just the test kits themselves, but about the resources that are required in order to be able to deliver that, because lateral flow testing, unlike swab testing, you can't effectively do it yourself. You do need, apart from health professionals, that you do need somebody there, you do need staffing, you do need a resource to do it. So that's the point of the bid. We think it will, alongside vaccine and people continuing to follow the guidelines, is something that will help us, but by using it in the right way.
Thanks, Richard. Going to take a question from Kevin Fitzpatrick at Radio Manchester. His first one may have already been answered, but I'll ask it anyway, just in case there's any further points. What preparations is Greater Manchester making to be able to administer the vaccine to people? And the second part of the question is, are there any last pleas around the spatial framework to Stockport councillors? Andy, I'll put that one to you first. And just to say, this is currently the last question, so if any other journalists do have a question to ask, I'd get it in now. Sorry, Andy, you're muted.
Yeah. So sorry, I was okay. Thanks, Ross. I mean, I would just ask everybody in Stockport just to consider the work that's got into this, but also what's at stake. As we get towards recovery next year, Greater Manchester needs to know where it's going. We want to be the first out of the traps with a strong plan for the recovery, and I just think we've got a plan in the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, and a plan that works for. It's a compromise in its very nature, but it does actually work for all of the constituent parts of Greater Manchester and all of the boroughs. In Stockport's case, it allows them to build way below their government target, way below, 5,000 homes below. And also it allows, and we've kind of been discussing this obviously with local councillors, it allows sites that have been the source of debate. In the final analysis, we've been able to find that extra bit of room to respond to those concerns. So I note that Conservative and Lib Dem councillors had sort of claimed the victory that High Lane had been removed, and we had said, well, yes, we think we now can respond to that concern, and I know it's been a long-standing concern, but I think there needs to be a degree of honesty here. If the spatial framework is voted down by Stockport Council, that site comes straight back in, because the council immediately is voting to take on the responsibility itself to find space for the 5,000 homes that it is relieved of finding space for by being a part of the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. So, yeah, there just has to be some honesty about these things with people. You know, I noticed that today Stockport Council has begun work with regard to the temporary relocation of the bus station on the building of the new Stockport interchange, and obviously we found a great deal of investment to go into that. It's a crucial part of the Mayoral Development Corporation in in Stockport Town Centre West, building all of those new homes. You know, there is a plan here for the borough that is, yes, challenging, but holds together in terms of the logic of building more in the town centre so that we can relieve pressure on those outlying sites. If Stockport leaves the spatial framework, it's going to get much harder to get the brownfield funding it would want to be able to build more homes on brownfield sites. So, you know, I just think it's kind of easy politics in some ways to sort of just say, oh, well, let's scrap it and we'll rip it up. But actually, there's a need to be honest with people about the consequences of doing that. The Stockport Borough will have to build more homes outside of GMSF than it does inside GMSF, and therefore it will be putting much more greenbelt at risk by going outside GMSF rather than staying in. And those are the facts. And I would just urge all councillors to think about those facts and just to consider what's in the best long-term interests of the borough before reaching any final decisions on the Stockport involvement in the spatial framework. It is, of course, a matter for them. The borough has to take its own decision, and I respect that fact. But let's have the evidence considered carefully, the facts considered carefully, and let's not let politics kind of rip up a plan that's both right for Stockport and disturb a plan that's right for Greater Manchester.
Thanks. Richard, did you want to come in on that at all?
Well, perhaps make clear something I said at Manchester City Council's council meeting last week when we approved the submission to the Secretary of State of the GMSF as far as we were concerned. And I'm not going to repeat what Andy said, although we've already had examples in Greater Manchester where planning applications which the local plan and local councillors wanted to turn down went to appeal, and those decisions were overturned at appeal because districts were unable to identify where their housing numbers would come from. So what you do is replace planned development with effectively unplanned development all over the place, and that's the real risk for Stockport. But the other element is that they are, apart from anything else, in order for the spatial framework, depending on Manchester, Salford and Rochdale in particular, but particularly Manchester and Salford, building significantly more properties over their government housing number. Those homes, if Stockport pull out of this, basically those homes go with it as well. Is that if they're not in a shared plan, they don't have access to those numbers, and those properties will go back into the pot for discussion with those local authorities that want to be part of a shared strategic plan. I think on the other half of the question, Ross, what preparations is GM making to be able to administer the vaccine to people? I think that was pretty much covered under Tom's question and the previous question, so I don't think there's anything more to add on that.
Thanks, Richard. You're going to bring Andy back in.
Briefly, Ross, thank you very much, because it's another matter of sort of, let's say, more local politics that certainly was raised last week, and there was just a development on that, which I just wanted to update colleagues on. It relates to the consultation ongoing on the Greater Manchester Clean Air Zone. And I know it's been in certain quarters been described as a congestion charge, which it isn't. But I just thought it was worth updating colleagues on a statement made by the DEFRA Minister in the House in response to a question from a Greater Manchester MP, Rebecca Powell, and she said this in relation to Greater Manchester, quotes, "It is not a congestion charge. The Greater Manchester plan does not include charging private cars, and the evidence provided by Manchester authorities to date shows that this is not needed." So I think with both the GMSF, Ross, and with the Clean Air Zone, you know, these are plans that actually put Greater Manchester in a position of leadership when it comes to the green recovery. I think it's better if we leave politics out of them and try and get consensus around things that will make our city region a more livable place, certainly when it comes to the cleaning up of the air. Let's not confuse the public by claiming there's something that they're not. As the Minister said, it's not a congestion charge, and I think that needs to be stated clearly. The petition that's going round to that effect is clearly a false prospectus in that regard. It's not a congestion charge. And I think we will all be better if we get ready for recovery and get ready for a green recovery in Greater Manchester. And these two plans are very much at the heart of that.
Thanks, Andy. We've had two more questions in, so I'll take the first one from Jen Williams at the MEN. Do you have any thoughts on whether lateral flow tests are safe for use among care home visitors? I know this is something that's been discussed, but I'm told that at Greater Manchester level there's some concern about the risk involved, as there has been in Sheffield as well. Will you be using the tests for care homes visiting under the plan you've submitted? I might put that one to Richard in the first instance, and then I'll bring you in, Andy.
I think the issue is not whether the flow tests themselves are safe for use among care home visitors, but something I think I referred to earlier is that lateral flow tests need to be administered by another person, and that person needs to be trained in the using of them. It's not something that you can do that easily, and that training is really, really important because it impacts on the accuracy of the tests at the end of it. So I think as far as care home visitors are concerned, is that what we'd have to work through is that to ensure that if we were going to, or if a care home was going to judge that it was safe to have visitors on the basis of those tests, that whoever was applying the tests was properly trained and able to administer them in an effective way. And so yes, there is a concern at a Greater Manchester level, and I think there ought to be a concern because if we don't get not just the delivery of units to care homes right, we don't get the training right as well, then it will put people potentially at risk.
Thanks, Richard. I'll bring Andy in on that question as well.
Yes, just to update colleagues on a discussion that happened at the GM committee yesterday, there is some concern about the way this is being handled, because tests have been sent to every care home in Greater Manchester, indeed the country, I think, in recent days by the government, and there is some considerable confusion out there and concern about how care homes will, building on what Sir Richard just said, how they will actually get this trained staff in place and how they will fund the delivery of these tests. I think there's a kind of front page newspaper headline, national newspaper headline today, kind of promising the public that this is all about to start and all about to happen. But the feeling from here yesterday was that these tests had landed in care homes without anybody having any real knowledge of the delivery plan, or with a lack of a delivery plan, and care homes have been very much sort of put upon again, and without sufficient thought being given for the way this will be delivered and the cost of delivering it. And it's certainly a shared concern across the Greater Manchester system at the moment, and the expectations maybe that have been raised, and the ability the gap between those expectations and the ability of care homes to deliver. So there was a very considerable concern shared across the directors of adult services in Greater Manchester, and I think efforts are underway to clarify exactly how the government expects these tests to be delivered and in what time frame, and a resetting of expectations around that. That's that, Ross. Was there a further question, Ross, did you say?
Yeah, there's one more, which I'll put to, it's going to be our final question. I'll put it to Richard first, and then I'll bring you in,
Okay.
and if you have any other final comments. So Richard, a question from Niall Griffiths at the MEN. Is there a risk that releasing parts of the city region from Tier 3, namely the southern areas and not the north, could reinforce existing local divides?
No, and I don't think there is. Look, we've been here before. We had Bolton, for example, and indeed Rochdale and Oldham, with different restrictions to the rest of Greater Manchester because circumstances required that. But I think we were able to discuss those factors and come to an agreement, and I think that's the position we are now. This is not some sort of schism, but it would be, I think, across all 10 local authorities agreeing that there are different circumstances in different parts of the conurbation that merit different responses. So that's not going to reinforce existing local divides. I think this is just going to be a matter of common sense judgments made on the evidence that's available to us.
Thanks, Richard. Andy, I'll bring you in on that question, and as it's our final one, if you've any other final thoughts.
Well, thanks, Niall. No, I agree very much with what Sir Richard said. And actually, if you think about it, you know, the opening up, if that happens, is going to be around the 19th of December, is what we've been told by the government. I don't know whether those timeframes might be revisited, but clearly that's going to present some businesses with difficulties anyway. So As I say, I hope all of Greater Manchester would be opening around that time. But even so, there may be some businesses who choose not to open. So I wouldn't overemphasise the extent to which Tier 2 will make a massive difference this side of Christmas. On the figures that we presented to you today, as Sir Richard said earlier, we're confident, both of us, that there is a very strong claim for all of Greater Manchester to be in Tier 2, certainly come the new year, and that we would start the new year on that basis, and obviously hopefully with our businesses able to plan on that basis. So no, I don't think there's a risk. I think we need to open as much of the GM economy as quickly as we can, and obviously as safely as we can. But it does point back to the point I was making about getting a fair financial package in place to support areas still in Tier 3 that isn't still where it needs to be, and more needs to be done to challenge on that. But we very much want to move as one Greater Manchester. I hope that is understood, and we will keep the situation under close review. But Ross, shall I wrap things up from there and thank everybody for again coming along today. It is a good day to be able to present this news to you, both in terms of our own cases, but also on the vaccine. I would very much hope that through you we can get that message out, that the scare stories just shouldn't be believed. They shouldn't be given any credence at all, actually. This is a time to trust the experts. They know what they're doing. The MHRA are one of the most respected regulators in the world, if not the most respected. And as I say, they don't rush things just because ministers say so, as I was trying to say earlier. They do it properly, they do it thoroughly. And yes, they don't take as much time because of the way that they work, which is, I think, the source of some envy in certain quarters, because they've always been able to move quickly because of the processes they've developed over the years. So people should have complete trust in the MHRA and the processes that it's run. We hope that trust can be built through you towards the wider public. People accepting a vaccination is in many ways helping secure the common good as we get a control of this virus in the new year, and we look to a better 2021 than the year we've had in 2020, when we reset things, get the recovery properly underway, and hopefully Greater Manchester can start working with the government to get levelling up happening at scale across all of our 10 boroughs. So Ross, I'm going to leave it there. I think that covers everything. I don't know whether Sir Richard wants to come back in or not. No, I think that's us for today. So thank you everybody for your attendance, and we will see you all next week. Thank you.